It happened when I was 33 years old, but I really connected back to experiences that I had in my childhood. So when I was little, especially really young, like 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I loved stuffed animals, and I had so many stuffed animals, and I loved the way that they felt, and I noticed that I would carry bunches and bunches of them around, and I started to notice what was it, what was the part of me that was able to carry these stuffed animals and able to love them so much, and I started to explore. They were my hands, and my hands were super, super special to me. And I thought, if my hands are capable of holding these stuffed animals and bringing me so much love and warmth, what else is my body capable of? And through the years growing up, especially as a teenager and as a woman, I started to feel more disconnected to my body. I was told stories about how it should look, how I should feel about it, how I should struggle with it. And over time, that started to become an internalized story for me. And it wasn't until I was 33 and pregnant that I started to experience my body in a new way. And then, I started to explore it a little bit more, understand it a little bit more. I was, you know, started to be having to go to the doctor more, being a pregnant woman, and so I started to question it more, but it wasn't really until my near death experience when I was shared that our bodies are part of the spiritual human experience that I didn't start to fully connect to it and start to learn that it is our spiritual experience on the human side. And so what happened in my near death experience was we were pregnant, and we had just moved to a new community, and I had just established with my new doctors, but they hadn't done the full examination yet. But I knew something was off about the pregnancy. I was already starting to question it. And at the time, even though I was well educated and had higher levels of degrees, I really didn't know the right questions to ask. And it was my first pregnancy, and so my experiences before this experience were that the doctors would tell me, "Oh, you're just a new mom. This is just normal movement. These things are just part of it, right? And we don't see anything wrong," which didn't turn out to be the case. And so when I had one night, I had what I thought was indigestion. And it turned out to be internal bleeding, but I wasn't aware because all of the bleeding was enclosed inside. My uterus had ruptured. And I just kept thinking it was indigestion, and the pain was getting worse. And then I would get a little bit relief of, laying on a side or going to sleep. And, finally my husband said, you just don't seem well to me. And I was telling him, I think I just need to sleep. I think I just need to sleep. I was dying. And he called the paramedics. And at that point, I knew I needed to go be seen. At this point, I was hyperventilating, struggling to breathe. I had internally bled so much that my body was now acidic to the point that it couldn't deal with it any longer, and my organs were failing. So when I got to the hospital, they started working on me, and they started getting the normal things. IV started, and they couldn't get those started. And so the last thing I remember is that they did an emergency procedure where they drilled into my leg to get an IV started. It was at that point that everything went black. And it kind of felt like at this point, time had just completely stopped. I was aware of some sounds around me, but it was mostly just blackness. And what I was aware of wasn't anymore what was happening. It wasn't doctors talking over me at this point. It just was little sounds here and there, like little musical sounds. And then it went away, and it was black again. And then I heard a voice, and I recognized this voice as me, but I was not of my body anymore. And I turned around in this experience and I said, did I just die? And then everything went black again. And I don't know how long this all took place. And at this point in my body, my organs were failing. They were trying to figure out if my baby had passed. He had, but I wasn't aware of this either. I was aware of starting to become more and more aware of immense love and immense safety. And out of this darkness started to arise these beautiful colors of light. And the best way that I can describe it is now with the new, James Webb telescope, and we're looking at more galaxies and bursts of stars, it looked a lot like that, and even more brilliant. So I just started experiencing this, and the music came back, and it was starting to play, and it was just so melodic and beautiful. And amongst this beautiful light and this beautiful color, I started to notice these beings, and they were beings that I had known and who had passed away from this life I'm in right now. And they were beings that I noticed and had passed away from lives that I knew that I had experienced already, and felt so familiar and so safe around them. And some of them approached me and some of them didn't, but they were just there in community to let me know that I was safe and loved in this experience. And one in particular, spirit guide, came up to me and he started to tell me, and there's really no, even though I knew who this being was, and I'll get to that in just a second. There was no like experience of skin or anything that we would relate to, right? As a person, I just knew the outline of the light. It kind of looked like a neon sign that you might see in a store window or something, and that was the indication that this was a being. It was this immense purple, visible spectrum that's beyond what we can see in this life. And he appeared to me, and it was telepathic communication, and he shared so many things. You're on the other side, you're safe, you're loved, this is your community, welcome home. And he told me that I was in this experience, and these are the different things I might notice, right? And he was kind of guiding me along. And this melodic music, one of the messages that came through was that these were other souls that were playing their own notes that were part of a chord of this existence, because it didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard on Earth. And I just felt so warm and safe, and I felt like my body was moving forward, and I had these almost like angelic hands underneath me, kind of pushing me forward, moving me forward, and keeping me safe. And again, at this point, I didn't know that my son had passed, and I every once in a while I'd see my body, and I would notice that my body was touching my pregnant belly, and I could hear myself thinking, maybe he's okay. They got me here. They got me in some sort of sense of safety, right? Maybe he's okay. And I kept having that experience of, touching my stomach and just thinking maybe he's okay. And then on the other side, I still was exploring these experiences, learning all these messages and learnings. One of them being all roads lead to one, because I had a lot of questions about, okay, I'm on the other side. And from what I know, I was very scientific before this. So I was like, from what I know, there's all these religions, but how does this work? And he just kept saying, all roads lead to one. And so at one of the points, I could hear people around me crying, and I knew it wasn't on this experience. I knew it was in my body experience. And it was because my son had died, and because my chances of survival were less than 1%. And that both of those pieces of news were being delivered. And I remember distinctly hearing a name of a doctor. And that doctor was only in that one experience. And I didn't know, that name came to me 3 months later. And my husband said, I don't remember a doctor by that name. And later on, when I went through my medical records, sure enough, there was that name in my medical records. So at this point, then, I started to realize on the other side, I started to see an image of my spirit being, of my baby. And my guide, who I previously said I'd get back to who my guide was. So my guide was really an infusion of men that I had known who were safe and protectors, like a masculine energy of safety and protectors. So one of them being an uncle that I had never met, but I was always felt very attached to. And one of them was even the spirit of Jesus. And one of them was he went by the name of Tree. And so I kind of think of him as Tree when I try to name him on this side. And they were all these beings of masculine energy that were infused that for some reason in this experience showed up to me to be my guide and to help me through this. And I forgot to mention too, the other infusion of this being was the spirit of the doctor who performed the surgery to take my baby out, who was at that point obviously in the living, but he was sending so many prayers for me at this point to survive and to make it through the surgery. So at this point on the other side, I recognized my spirit baby joining the experience. And I felt a lot of emotions, but mostly just love, right? And kind of this gratitude that we were going to be going through this experience together. And then I was told, actually, you're going back. You're going back, and you're going to have to separate from your son. And it was almost instantly that when this was told to me, and I was feeling kind of like already starting to feel human emotions again, like feeling a little bit like sadness and like, no, I didn't want to go. And it was, no, I didn't want to go back for, because it was such a loving experience, and also because my son was there. And at that moment, it was almost like a flash, and there were these orange lights that went underneath my body. And they sounded like prayers, and they sounded like medicine and love. And the spirit guide said, you're going to go back, but I'm going to infuse your baby into a hammock in your heart, so that every time that your heart beats, you will feel him with you. And so as I started to come back in my body, the first thing, and this is why I talk about my hands, being a child, the first thing that I noticed were my hands. And this was also the time when they had brought my baby to me, and I was able to, hold him the best I could, right? I was in a coma at this point. And I believe that's the point when my blood pressure started to turn around and started to, I don't have no way to prove it, right? But this is what I believe, and this is what I know to be my truth, is that's when my blood pressure started to stabilize and I started to come back, was when I was able to hold him and then also have him as a hammock in my heart. And so I started to slowly come back into my body. I noticed that experience, and then I noticed after they had taken him back, I noticed that my husband was on one side and he was holding my hand, and then at the other side was a stuffed animal that I'd had from when I was growing up, that they had brought into the hospital to help me through this experience. I will say that because through my experience in near death, that I did lose my son. I did experience, even though I knew how beautiful the other side was, I still did experience grief. Grief is a very human emotion. And what it is expressions of love that you have in this human experience that also, because the veil is very thin between this experience and the human and the other side, that also expand that love to the other side. And so your beings on the other side, whether it's through a pregnancy loss or whether it's a loss of a loved one, an adult, right? They feel that love while you're grieving. And as you start to integrate your grief, they're still feeling that love. And grief is that expression of deep, deep, deep love. And it's so not to be afraid of it, not to feel that you're not allowed to grieve, even though you've heard all these stories of us talking about how wonderful the other side is. That is true. And also, like, the human experience is that we grieve. That's our expression of love. And as we integrate, we still continue that love, and we can still talk to our loved ones on the other side in your own way.